From my window in the wall of Jericho, I see a city shaking with fear. Everyone's talking about an unstoppable army and a God who parts seas. I've spent my life just trying to survive in the shadows. My home literally built into the walls that are supposed to protect us. I am Rahab, and in a city of stone, my reputation is the most fragile thing I own and my biggest liability. I'm a prostitute. I've seen the hearts of men at their weakest, their boasts and fears laid bare in the dim light of my rooms. But the fear I see now in the eyes of our soldiers, in the whispers of the merchants, it's different. It's a cold dread that has nothing to do with Canaanite politics. It's fear of the divine. As the dust of that approaching army of Israelites rises on the horizon, I have to wonder, could their God be my way out? My life has been defined by walls, the wall of this city, and the walls I've built around my own heart. But what happens when those walls come crashing down? For everyone else in Jericho, it's the end of the world. For me, it might just be the beginning. This is a story of how I, a Canaanite harlot, bet everything on a God I'd never met, all because of a promise whispered in the dark in a single scarlet thread hanging from my window. Before the spies showed up, there were the stories. They came into my home on the lips of travelers and tired soldiers, tales meant to impress or frighten. Most of it was just noise, but the stories about the Israelites, they were different. They weren't just about an army. They were about a God who had carved a dry path straight through the Red Sea and then swallowed the entire Egyptian army. A God who gave them victory over the mighty Amorite kings, Sihon and Og, rulers whose names alone used to scare children into behaving. Here in Jericho, we have gods. Baal and Asherah, idols of stone and wood, we try to keep happy with incense and offerings. They're gods of the harvest and the rain. Gods you can bargain with, whose favor is as fickle as the weather. They are part of the city, as solid as the walls. But the God of the Israelites, he was different. He had no idol, no temple here. His name was a whisper, a presence you could feel in the terror of his enemies. The merchants would talk about it, their voices hushed. The dread of them has fallen on us, they'd confess. All the inhabitants of the land are melting in fear. I listened from the shadows, like I always do. My line of work teaches you to read people, to find the truth under the words. And what I heard wasn't the usual bragging of soldiers after a skirmish. This was pure, primal fear. The powerful men of Jericho, the same men who visited my home, who strutted through the streets with such pride, were terrified. Their confidence was gone, replaced by a frantic search for a strategy, any way to stop the unstoppable. They saw an invading army. I was beginning to see a divine judgment. Night after night I'd look out my window. My house was built right into the city wall, a place for people on the edge of society. It wasn't much, but it gave me a unique view. I could see the vast plains where this Israelite horde was now camped. From my perch I felt the city's fear like a constant, low hum. But in my heart, something else was stirring. It wasn't fear. It was a strange and terrifying hope. I'd spent my life serving men and appeasing gods who offered me nothing. My body, my time, my dignity, all were things to be traded for survival. I was trapped in shame, an outcast in my own home. The gods of Jericho never offered redemption. They only demanded more. But the stories of this other God, this I Am, were stories of power and deliverance for his people. The stories said he wasn't a god of a place, tied to a mountain or a stone. He was God of the heavens above and the earth below. A dangerous thought began to form in my mind. What if these stories were true? What if the God of Israel was the one true God? And if he was, what did that mean for me, a Canaanite? A woman, a prostitute. By every law and tradition, I was the enemy. I was unclean. I was part of the very city he was coming to destroy. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. While the rest of Jericho prepared for war, I found myself preparing for something else. I watched and listened, piecing together fragments of rumor and dread into a tapestry of faith. I didn't know his laws. I'd never seen his miracles. I had no scrolls to read or priests who teach me. My faith was born from second-hand reports, from the terrified confessions of my clients. It was a fragile thing, built on whispers in a city of stone. But as the days passed, and the shadow of Israel grew longer, that fragile faith became the only real thing I had. I had lived my whole life on the edge. Now, I felt like I was on the edge of a choice that would either be my complete ruin or my impossible salvation. The night it all started was like any other. The city was quieting down, the sound of sheep being brought in, the distant clang of a hammer, the murmur of voices from nearby courtyards. I was tidying up, the air thick with the smell of oil lamps and stale wine. My profession requires a certain anonymity for my guests, and my location on the outer wall offered a discreet way in and out. It was a place for men who didn't want to be seen. Then came the knock. It wasn't a drunken soldier or a nervous merchant. It was firm, deliberate, cautious. The instincts you learn after years of living on the edge kicked in. These weren't ordinary visitors. I opened the door just a crack, blocking the view inside. Two men stood there. They were clearly not from Jericho. Their clothes were dusty, their faces tight with the stress of a high-stakes mission. They looked like men trying very hard to blend in, which only made them stand out more. Their eyes darted around, scanning the alley, scanning me. They were Israelites. I knew it instantly. They were spies. Every dangerous hope I had been harboring rushed to the front of my mind. The God I had only heard about had just sent his messengers to my doorstep. My mind was split. Panic and purpose fought for control. Turning them away was a safe thing to do. Hiding them was treason, and the punishment for that was a quick, brutal death. My own king would have me executed without a second thought. My neighbors, who already looked down on me, would cheer. They asked for a room. Simple words, but the request was heavy. They had chosen my house for a reason. An inn or a brothel is the perfect cover. With a constant flow of strangers, 2 more would hardly be noticed. It's a place where questions aren't asked, where a transaction can buy silence. They were counting on my discretion. This was the moment that the abstract faith I'd been nurturing had to become real. It's one thing to believe in a distant God. It's another to risk your life for his servants. I looked at them, these 2 men who represented the army coming to destroy my world. They looked tired and anxious, but determined. I didn't see conquerors. I saw men on a mission for their God, the God who parted seas. "Come in," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I opened the door wide and ushered them inside. As I slid the heavy wooden bar across the door, the weight of my decision settled on me. I had just betrayed my city. I had just thrown in my lot with a foreign people and a foreign God. The life I had known moments before was over. In that instant, I stopped being just a prostitute of Jericho. I was a conspirator, a traitor. And for the first time in a very long time, God had literally come knocking at my door. The spies were on edge, speaking in low, urgent tones. They asked about Jericho's defenses, the morale of our soldiers, the spirit of the people. I told them the truth. I told them how the stories of their God had arrived before them, how a paralyzing terror had gripped the heart of the city. "I know that the Lord has given you the land," I confessed, the words feeling both foreign and profoundly true. "The terror of you has fallen on us, and all the inhabitants of the land are melting in fear because of you." Even as I spoke, I was gathering the stalks of flax I'd laid out on my flat roof to dry. Hiding them on the roof was a risk, but it was the only place. No one would think to look for them out in the open. I told them to lie down, and I started covering them with the flax, the coarse stalks rustling as I worked. I'd barely finished when I heard the sound I was dreading from the street below, the heavy pounding of soldiers' fists on my door. "Open up, in the name of the king." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The test had come way sooner than I expected. Under the flax, the spies were completely still. Their lives, and mine, depended on what I did next. I took a slow, deep breath, forcing a look of weary indifference onto my face. I walked down the stairs, my steps measured, trying not to show the panic I felt. I drew back the bar and opened the door to face the captain of the guard. His face was grim, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "The king has been informed," the captain said, his voice hard as iron, "that the spies from Israel entered your house tonight. Bring them out." My mind was racing. I had to be convincing. In a way, my whole life has been a performance. I'd learned to fake pleasure, interest, affection. Now, I had to fake ignorance. It was the most important performance of my life. I leaned against the doorframe, putting on an air of tired annoyance. "Yes, the men came to me," I admitted, using a little truth to sell the lie, but I didn't know where they were from. I gestured vaguely toward the city gate, now barred for the night. "They left just before the gate was shut at dusk. I don't know which way they went." I looked the captain right in the eye, adding a bit of urgency to my voice. "If you hurry, you can still catch them. Go quickly." It was a bold-faced lie, a direct betrayal of my king. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at me to give them up and save myself. But a stronger, newer instinct held me firm. This was my act of faith. By protecting these men, I was protecting my only hope for a future. I was choosing their God over my king. The captain stared at me, searching my face for any sign of a lie. I met his stare without flinching. For a moment that stretched on forever, he was silent. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. I could feel the 2 men hidden on the roof, their fates hanging on this single exchange. Finally, he grunted in frustration. He seemed to buy it. Why wouldn't he? I was just a harlot. What reason would I have to risk my life for foreign spies? My reputation made my lie believable.